Welcome to the Psychology of Us. This podcast is created by R.J. Starr, a public intellectual and independent psychology educator. The material presented is educational and interpretive, examining psychological life as a domain of understanding rather than intervention. It does not provide therapy, diagnosis, or professional guidance. Each episode stands as a complete work of public psychological inquiry.
Most of us have had the experience, even if we didn't have language for it at the time. You explain something carefully and patiently. You answer the question that was asked. You may even take the extra step of clarifying edge cases, exceptions, or context. The explanation lands cleanly. There is no ambiguity left in the facts themselves. And then the person asks again. Not the same sentence exactly, a slightly different phrasing, a new angle, a hypothetical twist, or just as often, a flat statement delivered with calm confidence. I disagree. At first, it feels like misunderstanding. You slow down, you rephrase, you offer examples, you cite sources, you make the reasoning explicit, you assume good faith. But the pattern continues. The question keeps returning. The disagreement persists, even when what is being disagreed with is not an opinion at all, but a rule, a policy, a law, or a plainly observable reality. Eventually, something clicks. The issue is not comprehension, it is not confusion, and it is not intellectual disagreement. What you are encountering is non-receiving behavior. This essay examines a psychological posture that is distinct from confrontation, but equally destabilizing. The refusal to let answers land, limits settle, or reality close the loop. Where some people dominate by force, others dominate by resistance. Where some override autonomy through intrusion, others preserve dominance by keeping everything unresolved. The exhaustion this creates is not accidental. It is structural. In healthy dialogue, a question has an arc. It opens space, receives an answer, and then closes, either through acceptance, disagreement, or thoughtful revision. Even disagreement allows movement. The conversation progresses. With non-receiving behavior, the arc never completes. The same question returns, reworded slightly, as if the answer were never given. Or the answer is acknowledged superficially and then dismissed without engagement. The conversation circles without advancing. Nothing accumulates. This is the first critical distinction. These are not exploratory questions. They are regulatory maneuvers. Each repetition is an attempt to reassert control after an answer has introduced an unwanted constraint. The person is not seeking clarity. They are testing whether the boundary can be softened, negotiated, or undone through persistence. The repetition is not cognitive, it is emotional. To understand this posture, it helps to focus not on what the person is saying, but on what they are resisting. They are resisting closure. Closure means that something stands independently of them. The rule applies. The answer holds. The limit is real. Closure requires internal accommodation. Something in the self must shift to align with reality. For many people, that shift is tolerable, even if it is unpleasant. They may not like the answer, but they can accept it. They reorganize. They move on. For the non-receiving orientation, closure feels like collapse. If the answer stands, they must yield. If the rule applies, they must adapt. If the fact is true, their preferred narrative must change. That internal reorganization is experienced not as growth, but as humiliation or loss. So closure must be prevented. The conversation stays open. The question remains alive. Reality is kept provisional. One of the clearest expressions of this orientation is the phrase "I disagree" used in response to non-negotiable facts. This is not disagreement in the intellectual sense. You can disagree with an interpretation, a value judgment, or a theory. You cannot meaningfully disagree with a statute, a written policy, or a documented procedure in the same way. When someone says, "I disagree to a federal law, a company policy, or a contractual requirement," what they are really saying is this: I refuse to accept an authority outside myself. The disagreement is not epistemic, it is existential.
If reality does not yield, the self feels threatened. So reality must be destabilized, even rhetorically. The goal is not to overturn the fact. The goal is to avoid internal submission to it.
This is why evidence rarely helps. More documentation often escalates resistance rather than resolving it. The clearer the reality, the greater the pressure to deny it. Where the invasive, in-your-face orientation dominates by intrusion, the non-receiving orientation dominates by attrition. They do not push forward aggressively. They hold the line by refusing to move. The conversation stretches. Time is consumed. Energy drains. The other person begins to repeat themselves, justify, defend, or over-explain. The dynamic quietly inverts. The person offering reality becomes the one working harder. This is not accidental. It is how control is maintained. As long as the question remains open, authority is suspended. As long as the answer is not accepted, the non-receiver retains leverage. Resolution would require yielding ground. So resolution must be avoided. One of the most frustrating aspects of this orientation is the sense that nothing you say sticks. You explain something once, then again, then again. Each explanation feels as though it disappears the moment it is delivered. There is no integration, no layering, no progress. This is because explanations are not being processed as information. They are being filtered through threat detection. Anything that requires internal reorganization is rejected before it can be incorporated. The content does not matter. The implication does. The person is not asking, "Is this true?" They are asking, "Can I avoid having to change?" As long as the answer implies constraint, the answer cannot be received. The damage caused by non-receiving behavior is not confined to personal frustration. In professional and organizational settings, it creates a quiet but measurable drag on collective functioning. Non-receivers become friction points in systems that depend on closure. Decisions stall, processes slow, meetings stretch. Others are forced to over-explain, over-document, and over-legitimize positions that were already clear. Work that should move forward instead circles.
This creates an invisible tax on the clear-minded.
Time and energy that could be spent building, refining, or executing are diverted into repetitive clarification. The burden rarely falls on the non-receiver. It falls on those attempting to move reality forward. Over time, incentives distort. Clarity is punished with extra labor. Resistance is rewarded with attention. What looks like one person asking reasonable questions becomes a system that cannot close loops efficiently. Momentum erodes not because of disagreement, but because resolution itself has become unsafe. Being on the receiving end of this dynamic creates a specific kind of fatigue. At first, you feel responsible. You assume you haven't explained clearly enough. You try again. You adjust your language. You slow down. Then irritation sets in. Why is this still happening? Why are we back here? Eventually, something closer to futility emerges. The realization lands that nothing you say will resolve the exchange. The loop is not a misunderstanding. It is the point.
At that moment, dialogue quietly turns coercive. You are being pulled into someone else's refusal to metabolize reality. Your time, clarity, and goodwill are being consumed to stabilize their internal discomfort.
That recognition is often the beginning of disengagement.
Not every repeated question is a power move. Some people are genuinely struggling to understand.
The difference lies in integration.
A person who does not yet understand will accumulate pieces of the answer over time. Even if they ask again, their question reflects prior information. There is movement. The conversation builds.
A non-receiver resets the field. Each loop returns to zero. Previous explanations do not register. Context does not carry forward. The same objections reappear unchanged, as if nothing has been said. The interaction feels eerily static. This is the litmus test. Learning produces integration. Resistance produces stasis.
Recognizing this distinction allows patience where it belongs. and boundaries where they are needed.
This orientation is especially difficult to name because it often presents politely. There is no raised voice, no overt aggression. The tone may be calm, inquisitive, even deferential. The person may insist they are just trying to understand. This is where the gentle Socratic trap appears. The non-receiver adopts the language of curiosity to keep the other person in a defensive posture. Each answer is met with another question, not to clarify, but to reopen what was already settled. Authority figures, peers, and experts find themselves explaining basics repeatedly, justifying conclusions that were already warranted. The power move lies in reversal. The person with knowledge is made to feel interrogated. The person resisting reality appears reasonable. Control is maintained not through force, but through endless inquiry. Nothing resolves, but the non-receiver remains centered. Digital environments amplify this defensive architecture because they weaken closure by design. Email threads allow infinite replies. Comment sections reward persistence. Messaging platforms eliminate natural endpoints. There is always another opportunity to restate, reframe, or reopen what should have concluded. For the non-receiver, this is ideal terrain. Digital space removes embodied cues that signal completion. There is no shared silence, no felt sense that something has ended. Every pause becomes an opening. Every unanswered message becomes an invitation to persist. What looks like diligence or engagement is often resistance to finality. The loop thrives because the medium itself resists closure. When faced with this orientation, most people respond by increasing clarity. They explain more. They document more. They try harder. This is almost always the wrong move. Clarity is not the missing ingredient. Boundaries are. Once non-receiving behavior is recognized, the task is no longer persuasion. It is containment. You cannot force someone to accept reality, but you can stop participating in the loop. This often feels uncomfortable. Many of us are trained to bridge gaps, smooth interactions, and keep things moving. Disengaging can feel rude or dismissive. In reality, it is necessary. Withdrawing from a non-receiving dynamic is not avoidance. It is an assertion of reality. It says, the answer has been given. The boundary exists. I will not keep destabilizing myself to stabilize your discomfort. This may look like restating the answer once, calmly, and ending the conversation. It may look like refusing to debate settled facts. It may look like silence. What matters is that you stop supplying energy to the loop. People who refuse to accept answers are not stupid, ignorant, or necessarily malicious. They are often protecting themselves from an internal collapse that would follow true accommodation. Understanding this does not obligate you to stay. Dialogue requires two capacities, the ability to speak and the ability to receive. When one is missing, conversation becomes a trap. Clarity, in this case, is not about being understood. It is about knowing when understanding is no longer the goal.
This has been The Psychology of Us. The work presented here is part of a public psychological archive by R.J. Starr. It is educational and interpretive, not clinical or advisory. Episodes are published as finished reflections and are intended to be encountered as complete works.